The ink on the divorce papers was barely dry when Garrett flashed that winning smile, the one that used to make Harper's heart race but now only made her stomach turn. He thought he had stripped her of everything, the house, the money, the dignity. He thought he was walking away with his mistress and his millions, leaving his ex-wife in the dust. But he didn't read the fine print of fate. He didn't know that the moment he signed his name, he unlocked a secret clause in a dead man's will that would cost him more than he could ever imagine. Sometimes the person smiling last isn't the one who played the dirtiest. It's the one who waited for the truth to drop. The conference room in the downtown law firm of Kensington & Associates smelled of lemon polish and expensive cologne. It was a sterile, cold environment fitting for the execution of a marriage that had been dead for years. Harper sat on one side of the mahogany table, her hands folded tightly in her lap to stop them from trembling. She wore a simple gray cardigan and jeans, a sharp contrast to the tailored navy suit her husband Garrett Walsh was wearing. Across from her, Garrett looked less like a man ending a 10-year relationship and more like a shark smelling blood in the water. "Let's get this over with, Harper," Garrett said, checking his Rolex. "I have a flight to Aspen in 3 hours, and Lydia gets cranky if we're late to the chalet." The mention of Lydia, his executive assistant turned fiancée, sent a fresh wave of nausea through Harper. Garrett didn't even have the decency to hide it anymore. For the last 6 months he had paraded Lydia around town, buying her the jewelry he used to promise Harper, driving her in the cars bought with the company money Harper had helped him save in the early days. "You need to review the final addendum regarding the beach house." "Harper's lawyer?" a timid man named Mr. Prenlow squeaked. He was a budget attorney, the only one Harper could afford after Garrett had frozen their joint accounts. Garrett laughed, a sharp barking sound. He didn't even look at Mr. Prenlow. He looked at his own attorney, a shark named Roger Banks. "Banks, tell him." Banks adjusted his glasses, looking at Harper with pity. "Mr. Walsh is generous enough to allow you to keep your car, Mrs. Walsh, but the beach house, the city apartment, and the portfolio remain with him. The prenuptial agreement is ironclad. You signed away rights to any assets acquired during the growth of Walsh Tech. I helped build that company." Harper whispered, her voice cracking. "I worked 2 jobs so Garrett could code in the garage. I paid for the servers." "And you were compensated with a comfortable life for 10 years. Garrett interrupted, leaning forward. His eyes were cold, devoid of the warmth she remembered from their college days. "Don't rewrite history, Elle. You were a support staff. I was the visionary, and now the vision has outgrown you." He slid the papers across the table. "Sign it. Take the settlement check, it's $10,000. Enough to get an apartment and start over. Don't drag this out, or I'll spend 10 times that amount in legal fees just to make sure you get 0. Harper looked at the paper. Dissolution of marriage. It felt like a death certificate. She thought about fighting. She thought about screaming that it wasn't fair that she had sacrificed her own graphic design career to prop him up when everyone else called him a failure. But she looked at his face, smug, impatient, already mentally on vacation with a woman 10 years younger, and she realized she was tired. She didn't want his money if it meant staying attached to his cruelty. She picked up the pen. "Smart girl," Garrett sneered. Harper signed her name, Harper Lewis. She dropped the Walsh immediately in her mind, even if the legal change would take weeks. Garrett grabbed the papers the second she lifted the pen. He signed his name with a flourish, the scratch of the expensive fountain pen echoing in the silent room. "Done," Garrett declared, standing up and buttoning his jacket. He turned to Banks. "File it immediately. I want the decree absolute by the time I land." He looked down at Harper one last time. "Good luck, Harper. Try to find someone in your own league this time, maybe a barista or a librarian." He walked out without looking back. Harper heard his booming laugh in the hallway, followed by the click-clack of high heels. Lydia must have been waiting right outside the door. Harper remained seated, staring at the empty table. Mr. Prenlow packed his briefcase awkwardly. I'm sorry, Ms. Lewis. It was the best we could do." "It's fine," Harper said, her voice hollow. "I just want to go." She stood up, her legs feeling heavy. She walked out of the office building and into the biting wind of a Chicago November. The sky was a slate gray, matching her mood. She checked her bank account on her phone. $300, plus the settlement check she held in her hand. $10,000. That had to last her until she found a job. She walked toward the bus stop. Garrett had made sure the car he let her keep, a 10-year-old sedan, had a dead transmission this morning, forcing her to take public transit. It was just another petty jab. As she waited for the bus, shivering in the cold, her phone buzzed. It wasn't a text from a friend or a family member comforting her. It was a blocked number. "Hello," she answered deeply. "Is this Harper Lewis, formerly Harper Walsh?" A grave, deep voice spoke. "Yes, who is this?" "My name is Arthur Henderson. I am the senior partner at Henderson, Clark & O'Malley in London. I am calling regarding the estate of your father, Robert Lewis." Harper frowned. "My father, I haven't spoken to him in 15 years. He lives in a trailer in Arizona. Or he did, last I heard." There was a pause on the line. "I'm afraid, Ms. Lewis, that your father passed away 3 days ago." Harper felt a strange pang in her chest. Not grief exactly, she barely knew the man. He had left her mother when Harper was 5, a drifting alcoholic who never paid child support. I see. I don't have money for a funeral, Mr. Henderson. If he has debts." "He does not have debts, Ms. Lewis," Henderson said, his tone shifting to something more professional, almost urgent. "However, his last will and testament has extremely specific instructions. He monitored your life very closely from a distance." "Monitored me?" A creep of unease went up her spine. "Yes, specifically your marriage. Robert was adamant about certain conditions. I need you to come to my satellite office in Chicago immediately. It is on Wacker Drive." "I can't," Harper said, looking at the approaching bus. "I just got divorced 5 minutes ago. I'm not in the mood for administrative work for a father who didn't care about me." "Ms. Lewis," Henderson's voice cut through the wind, sharp and commanding. "The timing of your divorce is actually critical. Did you sign the papers? Is it legally filed?" "Yes." "Why?" "Because." Henderson said your father's estate, valued at approximately £400 million, was held in a trust that could only be released to you upon the condition that you were no longer legally bound to Garrett Walsh. Harper nearly dropped the phone. The bus roared past her, splashing muddy water onto her boots, but she didn't move. "What did you say?" she whispered. "I said come to my office, Ms. Lewis. We have a lot to discuss. And do not under any circumstances tell Mr. Walsh that the ink is dry." 40 minutes later, Harper sat in an office that made Garrett's lawyer's firm look like a strip mall kiosk. Henderson, Clark & O'Malley occupied the top 3 floors of one of Chicago's oldest skyscrapers. The wood paneling was real oak, the carpets were Persian, and the view overlooked the entire freezing city. Arthur Henderson was a man in his 60s with silver hair and a suit that cost more than Harper's former house. He poured her a cup of tea from a silver service. "I don't understand," Harper said, her hands shaking so hard the china rattled. "My father was a drunk. He worked odd jobs. My mother struggled her whole life because of him." "Your father was a complicated man," Henderson said, sitting opposite her. He opened a thick leather file. "Robert battled demons, yes. Alcohol was one of them. But 20 years ago, shortly after he left, he got sober. He didn't contact you because he felt he didn't deserve to. He wanted to build something first." Henderson slid a photograph across the desk. It showed Robert Lewis, older and grayer, standing in front of a massive mining operation in Australia. He went into mining, rare earth minerals. He had a geology degree that he never used until he got sober. He struck a deposit in Western Australia that turned out to be one of the largest lithium finds of the decade. He sold the rights to a Chinese conglomerate 4 years ago, but kept a majority share in the royalties. Harper stared at the photo. The man looked like her father, but his eyes were clear, sharp. "Why didn't he tell me?" Harper asked, tears pricking her eyes. "Mom died thinking he was a bum. I struggled to pay for college. I married Garrett partly because I was so terrified of being poor like my parents." He knew that, Henderson said softly. He hired private investigators to watch over you. He wanted to approach you 10 years ago. He was ready. But then, you met Garrett Walsh. Harper stiffened. What does Garrett have to do with this? Henderson pulled out another document. It was a dossier. Harper opened it and saw photos of Garrett. Not just public photos, but photos of him in casinos, photos of him arguing with business partners and transcripts of emails. Your father didn't trust him, Henderson explained. Robert had an instinct for people. He saw Garrett for what he was, a narcissist who viewed you as an asset, not a partner. Robert knew that if he revealed his wealth to you while you were with Garrett, Garrett would have drained you dry. He would have manipulated you into signing over the inheritance to invest in his company, and then he would have discarded you. Harper felt a chill. It was exactly what Garrett would have done. So he stayed away. He stayed away to protect the money for you. He set up the Lewis Trust. The terms were simple. The beneficiary. Harper Lewis receives the entire estate solely upon the dissolution of her marriage to Garrett Walsh or upon Garrett Walsh's death. If you stayed married to him forever, the money would have gone to charity upon your death. Robert refused to let a single penny fall into Garrett's hands. Henderson leaned forward. When my associates alerted me that divorce filings were in motion, we prepared the transfer. But we had to wait for the signature. If you had reconciled, the trust would remain frozen. Harper sat back, her mind reeling. 400 million pounds. That was over $500 million. Garrett was worth maybe 20 million on a good day, and he acted like he owned the world. So it's mine? Harper asked. Right now. The moment the judge stamps those papers, which according to my source at the courthouse happened electronically 11 minutes ago, you are now one of the wealthiest women in Chicago. Harper looked at her hands. The same hands that had scrubbed Garrett's floors. The same hands that had typed his code when his wrists were sore. The same hands he had mocked for being rough just last week. Does he know? Harper asked. Garrett No. Roberts' name was never in the papers. The trust is managed through a shell corporation in Singapore. To Garrett, your father is still the man in the trailer. A slow, cold anger began to burn in Harper's chest. It replaced the sadness. It replaced the fear. Garrett kicked me out of our home, she said quietly. He gave me $10,000 and told me to find a barista to date. He's flying to Aspen right now to celebrate with his mistress. Henderson smiled a dry, thin smile. The Aspen House. Is that the chalet on Ridgeview Drive? Harper nodded. He bought it last year. He loves that place more than he ever loved me. Henderson tapped his computer key. Interesting. It seems that property was purchased through a holding company called Walsh Ventures, correct? Yes. He puts everything in the company name to avoid taxes. And Walsh Ventures has been seeking a massive capital injection to cover some bad crypto investments Garrett made last quarter. He's leveraged everything, including the Aspen House, to a private equity firm in New York. Henderson turned the screen around. That private equity firm is a subsidiary of the Lewis Trust. Your father bought his debt, Harper. He bought it 6 months ago when Garrett started getting sloppy. Harper stared at the screen. You mean I own his debt? You own the mortgage on his office building. You own the lien on his Aspen House. And you own the note on his private jet. Henderson's eyes twinkled. Technically, he is currently flying in your plane to stay in your house. Harper stood up and walked to the window. The city lights were turning on below her. She didn't feel small anymore. She didn't feel like the discarded wife. Mr. Henderson, Harper said, turning around, how fast can we get to Aspen? Garrett Walsh stretched his legs out in the leather seat of the Gulfstream G650. He swirled the scotch in his glass, listening to the hum of the engines. Across from him, Lydia was taking selfies for Instagram, captioning them #NewBeginnings and #BossLife. Put the phone away, babe, Garrett said, though he was smiling. Wait until we land. The reception is spotty up here. I just want everyone to know we're finally free, Lydia cooed, leaning over to kiss him. She's gone, Garrett. No more gloomy Harper bringing down the vibe. She's history, Garrett agreed, taking a sip. God, I should have done this years ago. I let her hang around like a bad smell. But hey, I saved a fortune on the settlement, 10 grand. Can you believe she signed for 10 grand? She probably thinks that's a lot of money. Lydia laughed. It's barely a handbag. The pilot's voice crackled over the intercom. Mr. Walsh, we're beginning our descent into Aspen. Weather is clear. We should be on the ground in 20 minutes. Perfect, Garrett said. Have the car ready on the tarmac. When they landed, the biting mountain air was crisp and refreshing. Garrett felt invincible. A black SUV was waiting. The driver loaded their Louis Vuitton luggage, and they sped off toward the mountains. The chalet on Ridgeview Drive was a masterpiece of glass and timber perched on a cliff overlooking the slopes. It was Garrett's pride and joy. He had spent $3 million just on the renovations. As the SUV pulled up the winding driveway, Garrett frowned. The lights in the house were off. I told the caretaker to have the heating on and the lights up, Garrett grumbled. Good help is impossible to find. The car stopped. Garrett hopped out, helping Lydia down. He walked up to the massive oak front door and punched his code into the smart lock. Beep, 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 buzz, red light. What the hell? Garrett muttered. He tried again. Beep, 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 buzz. Battery must be dead. He sighed. He fished his keys out of his pocket and tried the manual lock. The key wouldn't turn. It was like the cylinder had been changed. Garrett, it's freezing, Lydia whined, wrapping her fur coat tighter. Open the door. I'm trying, Garrett snapped. He pounded on the door. Hello? Is anyone in there, Mrs. Higgins? Suddenly the floodlights on the porch blinded them. They clicked on with a mechanical hum, illuminating Garrett and Lydia like deer in headlights. The front door didn't open. Instead, a voice came from the intercom speaker. A calm, polite British voice. I'm afraid this is private property, Mr. Walsh. Please step away from the door. Who is that? Garrett roared at the intercom. I own this house. Open the damn door or I'll call the police. Actually, the voice replied, the police are already on their way. You are trespassing. Trespassing on my own house. Garrett turned to Lydia, his face red. This is insane. It's a glitch in the security system. Someone hacked it. He walked around the side of the house to the patio doors, grabbing a heavy stone from the garden. I'm breaking a window. I don't care. He raised the stone, but before he could throw it, he heard the crunch of tires on gravel. Another car was coming up the driveway. It wasn't the police. It was a sleek silver Rolls-Royce Phantom. It glided to a halt behind the SUV. Garrett lowered the stone. Who is this now? The driver got out a large man in a dark suit and opened the rear passenger door. First a cane emerged, then Arthur Henderson stepped out. And then a woman. She was wearing a long cashmere camel coat that looked incredibly expensive. She wore dark sunglasses despite it being night. Her hair was blown out in a sleek, powerful style, not the messy bun Garrett was used to seeing. She walked toward the light, her heels clicking on the frozen pavement. Garrett squinted. Harper. Lydia gasped. What is she doing here? Harper stopped 10 feet away from them. She took off her sunglasses. Her eyes were cold, harder than the ice on the roof. Hello, Garrett, she said. Her voice wasn't the timid whisper from the lawyer's office. It was steady, resonant. Harper, what the hell is this? Garrett marched toward her. Did you follow us? How did you afford a rental like that? You spent your whole settlement on a car rental to stalk me? I didn't rent it, Harper said calmly. And I'm not stalking you. I'm just visiting my property. Your property. Garrett laughed, a nervous, incredulous sound. You signed the papers, honey. You get nothing. This house is owned by Walsh Ventures. Correct. Mr. Henderson stepped forward. And as of 4 hours ago, the primary creditor for Walsh Ventures exercised their right to foreclose due to violation of loan covenants. Foreclose? Garrett's face went pale. I didn't violate any covenants. I made the interest payments. The covenant, Henderson said, pulling a paper from his breast pocket, stated that the borrower must remain a person of good moral standing and maintain specific liquidity ratios. Your ratio dropped when your crypto crashed, and the moral standing, well, fraud is frowned upon. Fraud? We'll get to that, Harper interrupted. She stepped closer to Garrett. The point is, Garrett, the bank called the loan. You couldn't pay the $20 million lump sum today, so the bank took the collateral. The house, the jet, the car you just rode in. What bank? Garrett screamed. I deal with J.P. Morgan. No, Henderson corrected. You dealt with Red Rock Capital, a private lender you refinanced with to hide your losses from the board. Red Rock Capital is a wholly owned subsidiary of the Lewis Trust. Garrett froze. Lewis, like your dad. Harper smiled. It was a small, dangerous smile. Turns out my father wasn't broke, Garrett. He was just waiting for me to be free of you. Lydia looked between them, her eyes wide. Garrett, what is she talking about? Do we have a house or not? Get off my driveway, Harper said. Both of you. You can't do this. Garrett stammered, his arrogance crumbling. It's 10 degrees out here. Where are we supposed to go? Harper shrugged. There's a Motel 6 down in the valley. I hear they have vacancy. It's about $10,000 a night. Oh wait, no, it's $50. You should be able to afford it. Harper, please. Garrett tried to grab her arm, but the large driver stepped in between them, blocking him with a wall of muscle. Don't touch me, Harper said. And Garrett, you might want to check your email. I believe the board of Walsh Tech is calling an emergency meeting tomorrow morning. Something about a hostile takeover. You, Garrett whispered. Me, Harper confirmed. Now get out. She turned and walked toward the front door. Henderson punched in a code and the door clicked open instantly. Warm golden light spilled out. Harper stepped inside her new house. She didn't look back as the heavy door slammed shut, leaving her ex-husband and his mistress standing in the freezing dark. The Mountain View Motor Inn did not offer Egyptian cotton sheets. It offered polyester blends that smelled faintly of stale cigarette smoke and industrial cleaner. Garrett Walsh woke up with a stiff neck and a blinding headache. The events of the previous night crashing down on him like an avalanche. He reached for his phone on the scratched laminate nightstand. 7:15 a.m. He had 23 missed calls. 7 were from Roger Banks, his lawyer. 3 were from his chief financial officer, Victor Cray. The rest were from board members he usually had in his pocket. Beside him, Lydia groaned, pulling the thin duvet over her head. Garrett, tell the maid to come back later. She mumbled, half asleep. There is no maid, Lydia. Garrett snapped, sitting up and swinging his legs onto the cold carpet. Get up. We have to drive back to the city. I need to be at the office by 9. Drive? Lydia sat up, blinking mascara-smudged eyes. Where's the jet? The jet is grounded. Harper stole it. Ideally, Garrett would have thrown a lamp, but he was too exhausted. Just get dressed. We have to take the rental car. The drive back to Chicago was a 4-hour nightmare of silence. Garrett drove the rented Ford Focus with white-knuckled rage weaving through traffic while Lydia sulked in the passenger seat scrolling through her phone. Garrett, Lydia said, breaking the silence around hour 2. People are talking. What people will... Twitter. Some business blog called The Market Watch. There's a headline, Walsh Tech CEO locked out of assets, rumors swirl of liquidity crisis. Who leaked this? Harper, Garrett hissed. She's trying to spook the shareholders. It's a bluff. She's just a graphic designer, for God's sake. She doesn't know how to run a hostile takeover. She probably hired that old lawyer to scare me. She looked pretty scary last night, Lydia muttered. Whose side are you on? Garrett yelled, slamming his hand on the steering wheel. By the time they reached the sleek glass tower of Walsh Tech in downtown Chicago, Garrett felt like he had aged 10 years. He pulled up to the executive parking garage, but his badge didn't scan. Access denied. Damn it! Garrett punched the dashboard. He reversed and parked in the visitor lot, forcing them to walk through the main lobby like common tourists. As he stormed through the revolving doors, he expected the usual deferent security guards, nodding receptionists, smiling. Instead, the lobby was eerily quiet. The receptionist, a young woman named Sarah, who usually blushed when he walked by, kept her eyes glued to her screen. "Sarah," Garrett barked, marching toward the elevators. "Why isn't my badge working?" Sarah looked up, her face pale. I don't have authorization to reactivate it, Mr. Walsh." "Authorization? I am the CEO. I authorize it." He didn't wait for an answer. He pushed past the turnstiles, forcing the plastic barriers open with his hip, and mashed the elevator button. Lydia trailed behind him, looking less like a queen and more like a confused accomplice. When the elevator doors opened on the 40th floor, the atmosphere was thick with tension. The glass-walled conference room at the end of the hall was full. Garrett straightened his tie, smoothed his wrinkled suit jacket, and marched down the hall. He burst into the conference room. "All right," Garrett announced, his voice booming. "Who called this meeting without my approval?" The room went silent. 12 board members sat around the oval table. Victor Cray, the CFO, looked at his shoes. But it was the person at the head of the table, his seat, that made Garrett's blood freeze. Harper sat in the chairman's chair. She was wearing a sharp black blazer, her hair pulled back in a severe, elegant bun. To her right sat Arthur Henderson. To her left sat a man Garrett recognized with a jolt of terror, Lawrence Fife. Lawrence Fife was a corporate liquidator. They called him the Butcher. "You're late, Garrett," Harper said calmly. She didn't shout. She didn't look angry. She looked bored. "Get out of my chair," Garrett snarled, walking toward her. "Security, why is my ex-wife in this building?" "Sit down, Mr. Walsh," Lawrence Fife said. His voice was like gravel grinding on concrete. "You are disrupting the shareholders' meeting." "She's not a shareholder," Garrett pointed a trembling finger at Harper. "She's a gold digger who tricked her way into some inheritance. Actually," Victor Cray spoke up, his voice shaking, "she is the majority shareholder, Garrett." Garrett spun around to face his CFO. "What?" Victor swallowed hard. "The debt conversion. When Red Rock Capital called the loans yesterday and we couldn't pay, the contract stipulated an automatic conversion of debt to equity. Red Rock now owns 51% of Walsh Tech, and Ms. Lewis owns Red Rock." Garrett felt the room spin. He grabbed the back of a chair to steady himself. "Victor, you told me the structure was safe. You told me we had time. You lied to me about the crypto losses, Garrett." Victor snapped back, finding his courage. "You told me it was personal money. You leveraged the company accounts to cover your gambling in Bitcoin. The forensic audit started this morning at 6:00 a.m. It's all there." Garrett looked around the table. The faces of the board members, people he had dined with, golfed with, lied to, were hard and unyielding. "So that's it," Garrett whispered. "You're stealing my company." "I'm saving it," Harper said. She stood up, and for the first time Garrett realized how tall she was. She commanded the room. "You've run this company into the ground, Garrett. You've treated the staff like servants, you've embezzled funds, and you've neglected the core product to chase vanity projects." She slid a folder across the table. "This is your termination notice, for cause. Meaning no severance package, no golden parachute, no stock options. Those have been seized to pay back the creditors." Garrett stared at the folder. "You can't do this. I built this place." "You wrote the code in my garage while I paid the electric bill," Harper corrected him. "And then you hired people smarter than you to build the rest, and you took the credit. It's over." "I won't sign it," Garrett spat. "You don't have to," Henderson chimed in. "It's a notification, not a negotiation." Harper looked toward the door. 2 large security guards, not the friendly lobby ones, but private contractors, stepped in. "Escort Mr. Walsh out of the building," Harper ordered. "And Ms. Reynolds," she added, nodding toward Lydia, who was cowering in the doorway. "Make sure they take nothing but their personal coats." "Harper, wait!" Garrett's voice cracked. He looked at her, searching for the woman who used to forgive him for everything. The woman who used to make him soup when he was sick. Elle, please. Let's talk about this privately. We can work something out. I still care about you. The silence that followed was excruciating. Harper looked at him, studying his face as if he were a stranger she had met once in a grocery store. I know, Harper said softly. You care about me exactly as much as I'm worth to you. Yesterday that was 0. Today it's 400 million. Goodbye, Garrett. She turned her back to him and looked at the board members. Now, regarding the Q4 projections. The guards grabbed Garrett by the arms. For a second he thought about fighting, but the fight had left him. He let them drag him out of the room, past the staring eyes of the board, past a terrified Lydia, and into the hallway. As the elevator doors closed on his former kingdom, the last thing Garrett saw was Harper pointing at a chart already moving on. The humiliation of the board meeting was only the first wave. The tsunami came 3 days later. Harper sat in her father's office at Henderson, Clark and O'Malley. It had become her temporary command center. The desk was covered in files, financial reports, legal briefs, and a stack of old journals her father had kept. Reading Robert Lewis's journals had been a revelation. Harper had spent her nights poring over his handwriting, learning about the man she thought had abandoned her. She learned about his sobriety, his struggle with guilt, and his quiet pride in her graphic design awards, which he had tracked from afar. But she also learned about the Black Ledger. In his final entry, Robert had written, "Garrett Walsh is not just a fool. He is a thief. My investigators have found traces of a secondary set of books. He calls it Project Icarus. He is stealing from his own clients. If Harper ever needs leverage, find Icarus." "Mr. Henderson," Harper said, looking up from the journal. "What is Project Icarus?" Henderson, who was reviewing a deposition, paused. "We aren't sure yet. The forensic accountants are digging through the Walsh tech servers, but there's a heavily encrypted partition we can't access." "Garrett knows the password," Harper said. "He won't give it up. He's currently holed up in a service department in the River North district. He's been giving interviews to any tabloid that will listen, painting you as a vengeful ex-wife who slept her way into a fortune to destroy him." Harper sighed. She picked up the remote and turned on the TV mounted on the wall. On the screen, a local news channel was airing an interview with Garrett. He looked tired, unshaven, wearing a sweater to look relatable. "It's a tragedy, really," TV Garrett was saying, looking earnestly into the camera. "I built that company to help people. And my ex-wife, look, I wish her the best. But she's mentally unstable. She's being manipulated by this shadowy legal firm. I'm just worried about the employees. I'm fighting for them." Harper turned the TV off. "He's good. I'll give him that." "He's desperate," Henderson corrected. "And desperate men make mistakes." "We need that password," Harper said. "If my father was right, Project Icarus is the nail in the coffin. Without it, Garrett can sue for wrongful termination. He can drag this out in court for years. He can poison the public opinion against the company. How do you propose we get it?" Harper stood up and walked to the window. She looked down at the city. She knew Garrett. She knew his weaknesses. And right now his biggest weakness wasn't money. It was his ego. "He's going to the mesmerizing Tech Innovators Gala tonight, isn't he?" Harper asked. Henderson checked his calendar. "He bought a platinum table months ago. I assume he still plans to attend to save face. He thinks he's still the golden boy." "Good," Harper said. "Get me a dress. A red one." The Chicago Grand Ballroom was dripping with crystals and pretension. It was the biggest night of the year for the tech industry. Every CEO, investor, and journalist was there. Garrett stood near the bar, nursing a watered-down gin and tonic. He had used the last of his personal credit limit to rent a tuxedo. Lydia was beside him, but the air between them was frigid. "Stop drinking," Lydia hissed. "You need to network. Find an investor. We need cash, Garrett. I'm trying, Garrett snapped, but everyone is avoiding me like I have the plague. It was true. Every time Garrett approached a group, they suddenly had urgent phone calls or needed to use the restroom. The smell of failure was on him, and in this room, failure was contagious. Suddenly, the room went quiet. The chatter died down. The music seemed to fade. All heads turned toward the grand staircase. Harper Lewis was descending. She wore a gown of crimson silk that draped over her body like liquid fire. It was elegant, bold, and unapologetically expensive. She wore diamonds around her neck that caught the light diamonds that had been in the Lewis family vault for a century. She wasn't alone. On her arm was not a date but the mayor of Chicago. "My God," someone whispered nearby. Garrett stared, his mouth slightly open. She looked radiant. She looked powerful. She looked nothing like the woman he had cheated on. Harper moved through the crowd with grace, shaking hands, laughing softly. The crowd parted for her. People who had shunned Garrett minutes ago were now flocking to her, eager to be in her orbit. Garrett felt a surge of jealousy so hot it nearly choked him. He downed his drink and slammed the glass on the table. "I'm going to talk to her," Garrett announced. "Garrett, don't," Lydia warned. "You'll make a scene." "I don't care." Garrett pushed through the crowd, shoving a waiter aside. He intercepted Harper just as she was speaking to the editor of Tech Weekly. "Harper," Garrett said, his voice loud enough to stop the conversation in the circle. Harper turned slowly. She looked him up and down, her expression one of mild amusement. "Hello, Garrett. Enjoying the open bar?" "Cut the act." Garrett stepped closer, invading her personal space. "You think you can just walk in here and parade around with my company's money? You think these people respect you? They're laughing at you. They know you're just a placeholder." The room had gone silent. Everyone was watching. Harper didn't flinch. "I think they're listening to me, Garrett, which is more than they're doing for you. I heard your credit card was declined at the coat check." A ripple of laughter went through the crowd. Garrett's face turned purple. "You stole my life," Garrett shouted, losing control. "You stole my work. You need to give me the admin keys back. You don't know what you're doing. Without me, that system crashes." "Is that a threat?" Harper asked coolly. "It's a fact. There are protocols only I know. Project Icarus." Garrett stopped. He clamped his mouth shut, realizing he had said too much. Harper's eyes sharpened. She stepped forward, lowering her voice so only he and the dozen people closest to them could hear. "Project Icarus," she repeated. "Is that why you're so desperate to get back in? Not to save the company, but to hide what's in that folder?" "I don't know what you're talking about," Garrett stammered, backing away. "I think you do," Harper said. She turned to the crowd, raising her voice slightly. "Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for the warm welcome. Walsh Tech is entering a new era, an era of transparency. Starting tomorrow, we are releasing a full third-party audit of all operations from the last 5 years. We have nothing to hide." She looked back at Garrett. "Do you—" Garrett looked around. He saw the suspicion in the eyes of his peers. He saw the journalists typing furiously on their phones. He saw Lydia standing at the edge of the circle looking at him with disgust. He turned and fled. He walked fast, then jogged, rushing toward the exit like a rat escaping a sinking ship. Outside in the cold night air, Garrett hyperventilated. He leaned against a concrete pillar, loosening his tie. He was done. If they did a full audit, they would find the encryption key eventually. And when they opened Project Icarus, they would see that he had been siphoning client data to sell to identity thieves in Eastern Europe. It wasn't just embezzlement. It was federal crime. He needed to leave the country. He needed money. He looked at his phone. He had one card left to play. One person who knew where the physical backup drive was hidden. "Lydia," he muttered. He looked up to see Lydia walking out of the hotel. She wasn't looking for him. She was walking toward a waiting Uber. "Lydia," Garrett ran over to her. "Lydia, wait. We have to go. We have to get the drive from the storage unit and get to the airport." Lydia stopped. She looked at him shivering in her thin dress. "There is no we, Garrett," she said. Her voice was flat. "What?" "I heard what she said. I heard what you said. Project Icarus, selling data." Lydia shook her head. "I signed up for the yachts and the parties, Garrett. I didn't sign up for prison." "You're my fiancé." "I'm a survivor," Lydia said. She pulled the diamond engagement ring off her finger. "By the way, I took this to a jeweler yesterday to get it appraised. I was going to sell it to help us." She threw the ring at his chest. It bounced off his tuxedo and clattered into the gutter. "It's a cubic zirconia, you cheap bastard." Lydia got into the Uber and slammed the door. Garrett stood alone on the curb. He looked down at the fake diamond glinting in the dirty water. He looked up at the ballroom windows where Harper was being toasted. A dark, desperate thought formed in his mind. He had nothing left to lose. And a man with nothing to lose is the most dangerous man of all. The warehouse district on the south side of Chicago was a graveyard of industry brick skeletons, of old factories, rusted fences, and silence broken only by the distant wail of sirens. It was 2:00 a.m. Snow was falling harder now, turning the streets into a slushy gray mess. Garrett Walsh parked the rental car 3 blocks away under the shadow of a flickering street lamp. He pulled up the hood of his black sweatshirt, a cheap thing he'd bought at a 24-hour superstore, and checked his pocket. He had a heavy-duty industrial magnet and a crowbar. He wasn't going to the main office tower. He knew he couldn't get in there. He was heading to Site B, the off-site server farm where Walsh Tech kept its physical backups. It was an old facility, one Garrett had insisted on keeping, just in case the cloud fails. In reality, it was where he buried his bodies. Project Icarus wasn't just on the main network. That version was encrypted. But the raw data, the stolen Social Security numbers, the credit profiles of 3 million users that he had been quietly harvesting and selling on the dark web, sat on a physical hard drive in Rack 4, Row E of this warehouse. If he could destroy that drive, the evidence would be corrupted. He could claim it was a system failure. He could claim the encryption key Harper wanted was lost. He could create reasonable doubt. He reached the back door of the facility. It was a heavy steel door with a keypad. Garrett's breath hitched. He hadn't used this code in 2 years. 1985. What was the last digit? He closed his eyes. 198524. His birthday and Harper's birthday. He punched it in. The light flashed green. Click. Garrett almost laughed. They hadn't changed the codes at the remote sites yet. Harper was thorough, but she didn't know the infrastructure like he did. He slipped inside. The air was cool and dry, humming with the drone of 1,000 cooling fans. The server room was a vast, dark cavern lit only by the blinking blue and green LEDs of the server racks. It looked like a digital city at night. Garrett moved quickly, his sneakers squeaking on the anti-static floor. Row A, Row B, Row C. He found Row E in the back corner. Rack 4 was there, a towering black monolith. "Got you," Garrett whispered. He pulled the crowbar from his pocket and jammed it into the side panel of the server rack, popping the lock with a loud crack. The metal door swung open. There it was. The master drive. The black box that held his freedom and his prison sentence. He pulled out the industrial magnet. He needed to wipe it, then smash it. He raised the magnet, his hand trembling with adrenaline. "I wouldn't do that if I were you." The voice echoed through the server aisles, amplified by the acoustics of the room. Garrett spun around, dropping the magnet. It clattered loudly on the floor. At the end of the aisle, standing in the shadows, was a figure. Harper. She wasn't wearing her red gala dress anymore. She was wearing a thick wool coat and boots. Beside her stood Arthur Henderson, and behind them, 2 uniformed police officers. "How?" Garrett choked out. "How did you know?" Harper walked slowly down the aisle, her face illuminated by the blinking server lights. "You're predictable, Garrett. My father's journals said you were a creature of habit. When you're cornered, you don't fight. You try to erase the past. We knew you'd come for the backup." You set a trap." "I changed the access codes for the main building and the accounts," Harper said, stopping 10 feet away from him. "But I left this one active. I knew if you were desperate enough you'd lead us exactly to the evidence we couldn't find." She gestured to the open server rack. "So that's it. That's Project Icarus." Garrett backed up against the machinery trapped. "It's nothing. It's just old code. I was coming to retrieve my personal files." "Don't lie, Mr. Walsh," Arthur Henderson said, stepping forward. "We have a warrant, and we have a tech team waiting outside to image that drive the moment you're in handcuffs." Garrett looked at the crowbar on the floor. He looked at the police officers. He looked at Harper. For a second, the old Garrett flared up the arrogant, bullying CEO. "You can't prove anything. I own this. You're trespassing on my genius." "Your genius?" Harper laughed, a harsh, bitter sound. "Garrett, I looked at the preliminary logs. You didn't write the code for Icarus. You stole it from an open-source developer in Estonia and modified it to steal data. You've never had an original idea in your life. You just steal things. You stole my youth, you stole my trust, and you stole from millions of people." "I did it for us," Garrett screamed, his composure shattering. "To buy the house, to buy the life you wanted." "I never wanted the house, Garrett." Harper yelled back, her voice echoing off the metal walls. "I wanted a husband who didn't look at me like an employee. I wanted a partner. But you were so empty inside you had to fill it with things, and when that wasn't enough, you filled it with other women." She took a deep breath, composing herself. "Officers," she said quietly. "He's all yours." Garrett lunged, not at the police, but at the server. He grabbed the crowbar, desperate to smash the drive before they could stop him. "No!" He swung the bar wildly. Sparks flew as he hit the metal casing. But before he could swing again, he was tackled. One of the officers slammed him into the server rack, pinning his arm behind his back. The crowbar clattered away. "Garrett Walsh, you are under arrest," the officer recited, snapping the cuffs on his wrists. Garrett was panting, his face pressed against the cold metal mesh of the machine he had built. He twisted his head to look at Harper. "You're going to regret this," he spat. "You can't run the company without me. It'll burn." Harper looked down at him with nothing but pity. "Watch it rise," she said. The trial of Garrett Walsh was the media event of the year. It took 6 months, but the evidence from the server room was irrefutable. Project Icarus had compromised the data of 3.4 million people. Garrett had sold the data to cover his gambling debts and to fund his lavish lifestyle. Lydia Reynolds testified against him in exchange for immunity. She painted a picture of a man driven by greed and narcissism, a man who mocked his wife while spending her emotional labor to build his empire. The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours. Guilty on all counts: fraud, embezzlement, and grand larceny. Garrett was sentenced to 15 years in federal prison. As he was led away in his orange jumpsuit, balding and pale, he looked into the gallery. He saw Harper sitting in the back row. He opened his mouth to say something, perhaps to beg, perhaps to curse, but she simply stood up and walked out of the courtroom, closing the door on him forever. 6 months later, the rebranding of Walsh Tech was complete. The signage on the downtown tower now read Lewis Systems. Harper sat in the CEO's office, which she had completely remodeled. The cold glass and steel were replaced with warm wood plants and art. It felt human. The company stock had dipped initially, but after Harper brought in a new ethics board and refunded every customer affected by Garrett's fraud using the remaining funds from the Lewis Trust Public Trust had returned. In fact, it was higher than ever. The market respected integrity. There was a knock on the door. "Come in," Harper said. Arthur Henderson entered carrying a small wooden box. He looked older, but he had a spring in his step. "The final papers are signed Harper," Henderson said. "The foundation is established. The Robert Lewis Scholarship for Underprivileged Engineers is officially active. Thank you, Arthur. Harper smiled. I couldn't have done this without you. You did it all yourself, Henderson said gently. I was just the messenger. He placed the wooden box on her desk. Speaking of messages, your father left one last instruction. I was to give you this only after the company was stabilized and Garrett was put away. Harper's heart skipped a beat. She reached out and took the box. It was old, polished mahogany. She opened it. Inside there was no money, no stock certificates. There was a simple silver compass and a letter. She unfolded the paper. Her father's handwriting was shaky but clear. My dearest Harper, if you are reading this, then the storm is over. You have faced the wind, and you have not broken. I know you must be angry that I stayed away. I know you must wonder why I let you struggle. But the wealth I stumbled upon. It is a dangerous thing. It ruins weak men. I saw what it did to my partners. I was terrified it would ruin you or attract wolves who would devour you. I needed to know you could build a life on your own before I gave you the means to change the world. I watched you work 2 jobs. I watched you support that man. I saw your loyalty, your grit, and your kindness. You possess a strength I never had. Garrett was a test, Harper. A cruel one, but a necessary one. You needed to see that your value does not come from who you are married to or how much money is in the bank. Your value is in your spine. Use the money, heal the company, but keep this compass. It doesn't point north. It points to where you are standing, because wherever you stand, that is the right direction. Love, Dad. Tears streamed down Harper's face, but she didn't wipe them away. She picked up the silver compass. The needle spun freely for a moment before settling. She stood up and walked to the floor-to-ceiling window. The sun was setting over Chicago, casting the city in a warm golden glow. Below, millions of people were rushing home, living their lives. She was 32 years old. She was a billionaire. She was a CEO. But for the first time in her life, she wasn't Harper the wife, or Harper the daughter, or Harper the victim. She looked at her reflection in the glass. I am Harper Lewis, she whispered to the city. She turned back to her desk, placed the compass next to her computer, and picked up the phone. Sarah Send in the design team. I have a new idea. She was just getting started. Harper's story reminds us that true power isn't about how loud you can shout or how much you can take. It's about how long you can wait for the truth to surface. Garrett thought he had won because he held the pen, but he forgot that integrity always writes the final chapter. In a world full of people pretending to be gold, be like Harper, stay solid, stay patient, and when the time is right, don't just take your seat at the table, buy the whole building. Enjoyed this story of karma and redemption. If you want to see more stories where the underdog takes it all, make sure to hit that like button to help us grow. Don't forget to subscribe and ring the notification bell so you never miss a new episode. What would you have done if you were in Harper's shoes? Let me know in the comments below. Thanks for watching.